Hi, I'm John Atack, and it's Mark Laxer, my good friend. And it's been way too long. You sort of somehow, if I don't book things, I don't do things. So when we finish today, we'll book something. And this, I don't want to sound soppy or anything, but Mark, I've quite missed you.
It's always wonderful to talk, John. And I apologize. Yeah, I kind of disappeared for a bit in that I went on some adventures with my kids into the wilderness. And I've been up in Alaska around Denali National Park. The park itself is the size of the state of New Hampshire in the United States. It's huge.
16 times the size of England.
Well, no, not that. But I would think Alaska is bigger than England. It's quite huge. And
size isn't everything, though. You know,
it's how you use it.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely brilliant. So, and then off on other wilderness adventures as well. Kind of the healing time of the year. But I'm back, and I'm bad, and I'm ready to go.
Cool. Are we going to get a wilderness book out of this, do you think, at some point?
Well, my son, Oliver Laxer, has a YouTube channel on which he's got a small, like a 2-minute video from each of our trips. One Alaska trip and the other is Washington State Olympic National Park. So that I'm afraid that those two videos will have to suffice in terms of our literary coverings of our trip.
You're not going to get a Pilgrim at Tinker Creek out of it then? Okay. Well, on Walden Pond, you know.
No, I've got too many other book projects at the moment, so I'm sort of booked at the moment. So
fair enough. Yeah, it is. I a few years ago, I sort of sat down and I thought about all the things I'm involved in, all the things I wanted to do, and I realized I was going to have to live to be about 2,000 years old to get through what I've been building up over the years. It's mad. And people talk, you know, there are writers who talk about staring at the blank page. It's like, how do they find the time? You know,
the whole bit about being bored.
Yeah,
I'm bored.
How does that happen?
Like, I don't get that.
No, me either.
There's no time to be bored. There's so many. The planet is so big just to explore, and there's so many people to meet, and there's so many projects. There's every minute is a project waiting to happen.
Yeah, wonderful things. I mean, I'm going to get my, you know, I retired in June.
Retired.
Yeah, but I'm going to get my painting studio working again. And we have music projects that I sing and I play the drums. And as you know, I happen to have a son who's a virtuoso guitarist and another one who's a virtuoso keyboard player. And so we can, you know, these days, what used to cost £1 million at Abbey Road, you can buy for, you know, $500 on the internet, and you've got GarageBand, and you know, I've got an electronic drum kit, what have you. But and a couple of novels that are actually finished, but I haven't put them out there, and I'm going to translate Hafez at some point, you know, from not from the Farsi. I'm going to take Gertrude Bell's version, and I've given it away, and you know. So much else to do, and so many people, and I keep meeting more and more fascinating people who I want to talk to. I'm trying to say, look, I'm going to cut the YouTube down. I'm going to just do this once a week, and then we'll slowly back away, and Spike will do more and more things about My Little Pony, and the channel will become massive, and away we'll go. But I did realize that I've developed these friendships. You know, you and I, in the real world, we haven't actually met. Imagine that thought. We have a virtual friendship. But I realized, you know, so many people, Joe Zimhart, Joe Kelly, Pat Ryan, Hoyt Richards, so many people that I talk to have become, I really want to keep talking with you. You know, I really want to find out more. It fascinates me. Still, we were going to talk about something that I can remember from childhood, because in my bedroom there was a little point on the wall with a little switch on it. Sadly, there never was actually a gas light on it, but nonetheless I was introduced to the concept of the gas light almost from birth. And then of course I saw the Charles Ingrid Bergman, isn't it, the second film of gaslighting, where the dimming of the gaslight means that he's monkeying about in the loft. And so we have this word that comes from this idea of giving somebody a distorted view of reality, playing with their mind so that they begin to doubt themselves and you can control them. And we call it gaslighting.
Right. So maybe a good place to start would be to discuss the very concept that people debate as to what is reality. So in other words, you just mentioned, John, gaslighting is a way of distorting reality so you can mess with someone's head, with their mind. And I've certainly run into that sort of person who does that. And it's quite debilitating, quite the tool. But people who do gaslight, and even people who don't, would say, some of them would say, well, what is reality? So in other words, if I distort reality, let's just say I'm a gaslighter, and I want to mess with you. And I just as an example, let's say we're walking somewhere in London and I stamp on your foot really hard with big hiking boots. Not a nice thing to do at all. And you'd say, what did you just do? And I look at you, and at this point, my foot is off your foot, and I'm just standing there, and your foot is hurting because I just stamped on it. And I turn to you and say, what are you talking about? And you said, you just jumped on my foot. Like, why did you do that? Like, ouch. It's like, I think you broke one of my toes. And I look at you calmly, my shoulders back, breathing normally. So, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you okay? Okay. So from the way I just described that gaslight experience, I stepped on your toe or your foot and hurt you, and then denied it, and then messed with your mind. Someone might look at that narrative that I just said and say, and I have friends on the left and friends on the right, politically, who might say this, but what is reality? There's an infinite number of universes. And who's to say whether you stepped on someone's foot? What is a foot? I mean, it's just a concept. And you get into this really kind of rabbit hole-ish sort of philosophical space in which there is no foot, there is no boot, and there is no stomping.
Yeah, it's like the comedian who said he always wants to punch Buddhists and say, that's your fault. That's your karma. You know? Yeah.
So so be careful if you're a Buddhist out there. And maybe wear a bicycle helmet and a big puffy jacket to protect yourself from those punches. So it sort of raises the question to me about if you're trying to protect an individual, John, from gaslighting, or a small group in a religious organization, and trying to protect them from gaslighting, or you're trying to protect a nation on a political scale from gaslighting, it raises this discussion that you and I are now having. It raises the question for me as to how to protect the people who may be gaslighted. In other words, what tools can we provide to the people on the left and the people on the right in terms of when someone says, like, whoa, ooh, la, 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 what is reality?
Yeah, you don't perceive reality properly, and I do, because I'm a guru, and there's the super gaslighting. And I think there's a foundation for this in a popular myth, which runs through religion and psychology. And the popular myth is, the idea is you have an enemy within. You don't know, and this unconscious, subconscious, guardian angel, demon, what have you, is doing things behind a veil to make you realize something, or to make, to push you in a certain direction. You're a kind of zombie that's being propelled in this way. And we find this in contemporary psychology. This isn't just Freud. with the id, ego, superego idea of there are these two guys in there messing with you. And the guru on the outside, the gaslighter, can manipulate this and say, you don't know what's happening because there's this invisible enemy. Let me also bring up a man called Immanuel Kant, as we're talking about philosophers, whose work I find completely impenetrable. Let me say that. But he did say this one thing, that there is the universe as it is out there, and there's the universe as we perceive it. Now, this Count Alfred Korzybski, the founder of general semantics, put it in, said, the map is not the territory. And we live within our perception and interpretation of the world. And that's what reality is for me. It's how I believe the world is. When somebody on the outside can then say, how you believe the world is wrong, then they can completely take over my reality. And I am, from then on, completely gaslit. I'm reading their books, I'm listening to their lectures, and I'm trying to reconstrue my reality, my map of reality, so it fits with theirs. Does that take us somewhere for the people on the left and the right, do you think?
Well, it absolutely does. And in a sense, a metaphor that comes up for me here, listening to what you just said, is it's like getting someone's password to their innermost information that makes them operate. And once that person has that password, they can affect and manipulate anything. And the other thing that comes to mind from what you said was, if somebody external, a trusted new mentor, points out that there is something in your inner sanctum where there's a hidden entity that you didn't see before, and now it's right next to you, and gives you the sense that that's real, then you've already given the keys, given them the password, and they then control that password. They could reset that password and you don't even know it. So you can't get in there yourself to decide. I think of it almost in healthy boundary issues. You can't create a boundary to protect yourself from someone controlling what's in your innermost heart and psyche. So this all boils down to me. I know I'm speaking a bit abstractly, so let me just come up with a concrete word. It all boils down to me to confidence, self-confidence, because let's say and I'm talking about myself now, my own childhood and adolescence. When I was 16 years old, I was actually quite confident, self-confident. But I met somebody who I learned to trust.
We're not talking about Frederick Lentz here, are we?
Yes, we are. And over the years, I gave him the keys. I gave him the password. And he introduced the idea that there was something inside me that he called them negative forces. And it's sort of like a ghost or a devil, if you will, the devil metaphor. And it was inside my psyche, inside me. It took me over. I was taken over, like almost in his language, almost an exorcist type of manner. And I subsequently, over the course of many years, lost my self-confidence until I regained it years later, and I was able to leave that group. So it's not like I was devoid of self-confidence to start with, but somebody who's skilled at it as a rhetorician or just somebody who's charismatic, they can chip away at that self-confidence gradually over the years using sleep deprivation or peer pressure or
drugs,
smooth talking. I'm sorry, what was that?
Drugs.
Drugs, certainly.
He, of course, used LSD, didn't he, to help destabilize people?
And fasting. That was part of.
Very effective.
Very effective. So,
well, let me interrupt.
Please do.
Was there, I mean, one of the things that's bubbling up in my mind is the sense of the cult of confession, as Lifton calls it, that those passwords that you give to somebody, you give the most private information to people, the things that really worry and distress you. And if the person that you're talking to is manipulative, and I'm afraid many people who pretend to be psychotherapists, for example, will manipulate you once they've got hold of your passwords. And they then know what buttons to press, as they say in Scientology, to make you react in a certain way, your fears, the things that you feel guilty and ashamed of in your past, and also the things that disgust you, the things that you're averse to. Those can then be used to gaslight you in a very complicated way. With this idea of, there's this thing inside of you that only I can see and I'm going to overcome it. So our natural desire to talk to people about ourselves, if that's not been thwarted by being abused at some point, that encouragement for us to talk to a therapist, to talk to a priest, to talk to somebody, to get something off our chest, is very easily manipulated into a control mechanism where somebody knows you know nothing about their weaknesses. They are a blank, a brick wall. You know nothing about them. They know everything about you. And to then say, self-confidence is self-trust, it's self-esteem, it's the same thing. And one of the usual things we find with somebody who's been in an authoritarian group is that, I can't remember where I first read it, was maybe Steve Hassan or Carol Giambalvo, but this idea that you take the person to a restaurant and they say, what do you think I ought to have to eat? That they don't even trust themselves in terms of what their own appetites and desires are anymore. And there's a little rule book outside in the dogma that says, this is what you should want. You're a vegan now because that's what the dogma says. You can't eat honey anymore or milk or what have you. That boundaries and routines and everything you do is reset. They've got your passwords. They will now change what you believe about the world, and that will change your experience of the world, because our experience of the world is based on our expectation, based upon our belief. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I have a kind of a question about this. Sort of the dumb, obvious way for a society to protect its members from that sort of manipulation is when kids are younger, to teach them about this dynamic and teach them to be self-confident.
Intelligent disobedience.
But there's a problem with that. And the problem is, as I'm just sort of pondering this, the problem is that societies at large, in cultures all around the world, are already infiltrated and packed and stuffed to the gills with organizations that kind of already do the same thing.
They create a dogma and they want to enforce belief in that dogma, whether it's political, religious, therapeutic, commercial. There are all of these systems and you're meant to believe them. They're tacitly accepted. You mustn't question them. Yeah.
Right. So there's, in a sense, there's not an incentive. I'm thinking just for the moment, because I'm kind of self-interested in the United States.
As long as it's enlightened self-interest, that's all right.
Well, that's okay.
That's capitalism.
Right. For which, yeah. So the thing about in the United States, the prisoners went to Australia and the religious fanatics came here. And that's how our country got started. And we apologize to the people already living here. We're sort of a nation of religious fanatics. It's a big chunk of who we are here. And so to teach people when they're young about cults and about gaslighting and about mind control, it's not tenable to do that here because we're already in that. We already inculcate our kids into cults. Granted, some of the religions are not necessarily as destructive as Heaven's Gate, or, you know, some of these more.
There's a spectrum. Yeah.
There's a big spectrum. Some of the kind of cults where, you know, everyone commits suicide. I mean, that's obviously one end of the spectrum, but there's plenty of steps along the way. And the fact is that it doesn't make sense for society to protect its members from cults, because those societies are cults.
Yes.
And that's I think for me to say that, let's say I was to attend Harvard School of Divinity, or some kind of, you know, sort of like the top echelon of society, I would be laughed at for saying that. Like, that's a radical thing for you to say, and you haven't done your homework.
Yeah, and which fraternity do you belong to, and have you had your hazing yet?
I just feel that my view of that is sort of outside the mainstream. And I think, one, I could be just wrong and they're right. Two, it could be that I'm just more sensitive to these things because I was inside such a group. Or three, it could be that these things are taboo to even talk about, because people don't want to. It's, in other words, religions. I'm starting to get this sense as I study the evangelical movement in the United States. I'm right now reading an amazing book by Robbie Jones called White Too Long, and about the Southern Baptist Convention, and how this huge block of people are basically coming out of a religious sect that was based on white supremacy.
Yeah.
And that's still a very huge block, a power block right now. And I'm beginning to see, for instance, and maybe this is bizarre because I'm saying this as a Jew, but if you look at a huge block of many millions of Christians, I wish to heck that they looked at what Christ said. My concern, John, is that these Christians, many of whom are my friends, my close friends, and I love these people, they're not quite looking at what Christ said. They're looking at Christianity, perhaps through their leaders, or the network news, Fox News is directing them in this way through misinformation. But they're seeing their religion, consciously or not, as a power block. And this same thing happened with Hitler. The Christians helped Hitler quite a bit.
Well, specifically the Catholic Workers' Party, under the direction of the Pope Pius XI's envoy, supported Hitler, and that's what got him into power. It wasn't just being cancelled by Hitler.
Thank you for clarifying that. But that, to me, I don't think Christ, if you look at what the man or the Godhead, or however you see Jesus Christ as, I don't think what he was about was, I think he was about the opposite. It's like, no, I don't want to get involved with, pious, the whole, back in Rome, the Romans, and he was on a spiritual path connected with God, not political power. And what people are doing today is, Christ was talking about love the other. Christ was this Jewish guy from the Mideast. He would not have been pro-slavery. I'm sorry. You could cherry pick what you want from the Bible, but that's not dealing with reality. And here's the point, my friend. Tens or hundreds of millions of people who are in power now in this world are gaslighting in the sense because they are white supremacists under the banner of Jesus Christ. That doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. I'm just going to repeat myself because that's a way to manipulate somebody, is to repeat things. And now I'm going to try to manipulate you. John, it doesn't make sense.
No. And there is that, I always come back to dogma. In talking about how you help somebody when they've left an extremist authoritarian sect or group, an abusive relationship, the first thing that you have to deal with is what I call the cultic shell. And having seen many psychotherapists fail to help such people, and in fact make their situation worse in certain cases, because they haven't actually realized that everything is interpreted through dogma. Everything is interpreted through dogma. So once I've been gaslit and come to accept these rules and regulations, then I check everything against the dogma. I do this automatically. It's now ingrained. It's my culture. It's where I live. So when I, for example, recommended Norman Cohen's excellent book, Warrant for Genocide, which completely destroys any idea of the authenticity of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, I suggested this to a friend of mine, and he said, but he's Jewish, so I can't read it. And you go, well, so your dogma says that you must exclude everything that comes from this particular source. I don't have such a dogma. I've looked at, James Corbett and Alex Jones and Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux. I have looked at what these people have to say. It is nonsense. But I didn't close the gate on them and say, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not listening. I'm not listening. I'm not listening. I went and looked at what they had to say. And dogma culture tends to be a way of creating an aversion towards anything that is not the same as this. I mean, recently I've been reading a lot of stuff about neo-Nazis and finding out that the identity Christian movement has come out of this. And you have the Wotanist movement. They're the two religious, and there's a Hindu part of it. And to find that Narendra Modi is actually part of what is technically a neo-Nazi group, and he happens to be the president of India as well, the premier of India, that we find these extreme views which are based in hatred towards others. Now, we could take apart the Gospels and we could say, well, let's put aside everything that Paul said, everything that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John said, and let's just say, take the things that are quoted that Jesus is supposed to have said, and let's say this is the important stuff. And I think even there you might get into trouble, because he came to bring a sword. The dead must bury their dead. He came to set father against son. These are words attributed to Jesus himself. He also said, if you would follow me, you have to give away everything you have to the poor. He also said you can't criticize other people because you mustn't, you can only throw the first stone at the adulteress, a normal legal practice at his time, apparently, stoning people to death. Great, good fun. But you can only throw the stone if you yourself are without sin, and you won't be. So you've got to forgive everybody. One of the things that confused me as a kid is that before the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says, don't use the vain repetitions of the heathens. When you pray, say only this. And yet I was taught to say, God bless mummy and daddy. I didn't say our Father who art in, I did actually 6 days a week. I said our Father who art in heaven and all of that stuff. But I would say to go even further than that there are so many contradictions, so many conflicts. If you look through the Bible or the Quran or the Zenda Vesta or wherever you want to go, there are so many potential interpretations and there is so much complexity that we need to put all of that down and say, if the human race is to continue, we need to have compassion for the human race. We need to stop this nonsense of racism, of believing that there are, enemies, that somebody needs to be mistreated because they come from, they went on a visit to the wilderness in Alaska, and that can't be permitted under the dogma. That we have to, first of all, embrace humanism, whether that's secular or religious humanism, I don't care. But it's the idea that humanity is worthy. And we then have to have compassion for humanity and humility about ourselves if we are to learn anything. And this, for me, the core argument is about authoritarianism. There are some people who believe that they are God on earth. They believe they are divinely inspired, people like Maharaji, Prem Nawat, as he calls himself now, that they genuinely believe that they are God or godlike. With Donald Trump, he was brought up in a vicious environment by his father, and every Sunday they would go and see a sermon by Norman Vincent Peale, the man who advised Richard Nixon that bombing Cambodia would be a good idea, among many other things, and wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, this stupid book that says you can control the universe through your thoughts. You can make God do what you want God to do. You know, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? These people are authoritarians. Hitler was one, Stalin was one. There have been many of them, and there's a spectrum there as well, but they believe they should be listened to and they should be in charge, that they are wiser than the rest of us. I believe in democracy, so I cannot believe in that. Then you have the mass of people, perhaps 60% of people, who are not sure that their opinion is valuable and who believe you just do as you're told and are obedient to the authoritarians. I think that's the problem, and it's a problem of the left and it's a problem of the right. As soon as we start going, you know, we put aside John Stuart Mill's ideas in On Liberty, where he's saying, listen to everybody, take everything into account, and then you work out what you believe about it. You have the right to assert yourself. You have the right to a voice. Instead of this, you know, the groupthink, the obedience, and the gaslighting that brings people to follow, teaching people critical thinking and teaching them also, with, you know, critical thinking is vital, but critical thinking without compassion and without an understanding of emotional manipulation, such as gaslighting or triangulation, won't help you. You know, even the most intelligent people will be pulled into authoritarian groups, even the most empathetic people. You know, coming away from Scientology, I have many friends, talking to Mike Rinder, who for 20 years ran harassment in Scientology. He's one of the nicest people you could meet. But he said, when, you know, of our one meeting 20, however many years ago, nearly 30 years ago, that although I seemed like a decent sort of chap, he knew he had to destroy me because I was against Scientology. And so there's this sundering. So if you don't have compassion towards others and you're not looking towards helping others and looking towards a future where people actually can live together, if you want to destroy some part of humanity, you know, the native people who you stole the land from, or the Jews, and you know, the notion of who the Jews are is utterly confusing to me, because it's not there are black Jews, there are Jews of, you know, most Jews are probably not descended from the former inhabitants of Israel and Judea. It's not a genetic thing. It's also not a religious thing, because Israelis, for example, have the highest level of atheism of any group. About 40% of Israelis don't believe in God, yet they're bound together. And I think perhaps more now by persecution than by anything else, more that Jews have been forced together and forced to defend themselves against the world, with all sorts of lunatic stories being told, which will always involve eating babies at some point, which I'm sure you do. You know, when you have the chance, Mark, being Jewish, I'm sure you go and catch babies and eat them all the time. That these insane ideas become dogma. They're believed by conspiracy theorists. They're believed by QAnon members. And people lose their individuality, in part to a group, in part to a guru, but mainly to a dogma, mainly to a set of beliefs that they feel they mustn't or shouldn't question. And I'm going to climb down from my soapbox and let you say something.
No, absolutely. So all this makes me wonder. I guess it sort of comes down for me in marketing, in the sense that so all the things you just said make sense to me. And I think it's very valuable what you just said and the way you said it. Intellectually and compassionately, emotionally, if you were to boil down all the things you just said, or the things we said in this segment here, it's sort of like, who would listen to that? it's not, how do you boil that down in a way that that not to make you and I famous, but just to boil down the concept of how to protect young people and older people from gaslighting and from someone taking away someone's self-confidence and replacing it with their own meme. It's very hard to do that because so much of the world is already trying to do that. We already discussed that. We call it religion. We call it selling things to people, commercialism, forms of capitalism. I mean, there's things about capitalism that could be construed as quite positive, but there's a very dark side to it. I'm sure we both agree as well.
Yes.
So it's very hard to get society behind our little project of trying to protect people from the magic that is their will power, their soul, if you will, their sacred self-determination, if you will. They're following their own dreams. They're something inside themselves. There are many forces allied over thousands of years to take that away at birth through stories and memes and so forth. So if I'm saying, gosh, I would like to push back against that huge tidal wave of, it's been coming across the ocean for thousands of miles. It has a lot of momentum. And here I am saying, hello, I want to stop that. That's why I say it comes down to sales and marketing, because
I agree.
If I have a book, or you're working with your family on making videos on YouTube, or I come up with a movie, or you come up with, a song or a poem, how do you frame it in such a way that it captures people's imagination, gets their attention, and it sinks in and does its magic and becomes effective? Is that a 10-second TikTok video? Because that would translate. Or is it a 2-hour play by George, Bernard Shaw? Or is it something from Shakespeare? What kind of, I don't know. I don't know, because the thing is, the competition is fierce.
It's all of the above, isn't it? And as Joe Campbell said, the myths have to be retold in every generation and reformulated in every generation, so that the truths within them can be shared. So, if somebody comes to your door and offers you an apple, be careful. If a snake offers you an apple, be careful. There are lessons about apples throughout history, and we need to listen to them. So I think, I would say that when we were kids, that actually quite a lot of what we took to be wise probably came from the music we were listening to, people like John Lennon or Bob Dylan. And we didn't understand that although they did have some insight into the world, they were not perfect beings. And, Instant Karma did in fact get John Lennon. And, we were all sat there and he's imagining no possessions. And that piano cost $150,000. It's like, imagine no piano. Do you think you can? That there's something about wising up. There's something about waking up and being reminded. And I think that part of that is what we are doing now, which is having a conversation, which is discussing issues and doing so in a friendly, if we disagree, we do so agreeably, as I keep repeating over the years. And by doing that, we investigate ideas. And I think that there are things that if somebody is seeking to influence you, the first thing to do is to withdraw from them. If somebody seems to be dominating you, being domineering, being authoritarian towards you, the first thing is to withdraw from them and think about what's been said and what's been done. And then talk with people that you trust who are not linked to that person about what's been said. And look to the internet, find out information, look for people who criticize somebody, so if you feel like abandoning your family,
right,
ever, because Stefan Molyneux advises this, go and have a bit of a look at what people say about Stefan Molyneux. But learning how to gather information and learning how to trust yourself, accepting that, when I was 18 years old, I probably knew about 1% of everything there is to know. Now I'm 66 years old and I know less than 1/1,000,000% of everything there is to know. It's incredible how foolish I have become over the years. The reality is that I've understood that I don't understand, and that allows me to back away. The terrible thing that gets in the way of this message, the marketing, the sales of this message, is the belief that we are invulnerable. Advertising works on other people, it doesn't work on me. And we have to be that way. We have to believe our interpretations. You have to believe our perception. So being willing to even slightly change our my side bias, our confirmation bias. For me, cognitive dissonance, when somebody challenges what I'm thinking, used to be something, we don't like being disagreed with. It used to be something I'd push away. Now I really welcome it. So, I did a great long 3-hour thing when Andy Nolch in Australia did John 8Eck Debunked. And I've been given permission, by the way, to use the Australian accent. I was criticised by Australians for not talking in Strine. Go on, John Cobber, tie me kangaroo down. But he spent an hour and 20 minutes castigating me because I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like Putin. I don't believe aliens have taken the planet over. I'm not a fan of psychic abilities. And he did this great video. And Sam and I spent 3 hours going through it line by line and saying, no, this is the way it is. I welcome that challenge. And if it makes me feel a bit uneasy, then it's time to go back and think about what I believe. It's not time to go, no, you're absolutely wrong. And, you should burn in hell. It's time to think about what I believe. And for me, there are guiding values, compassion and humility. Compassion is the way, to understand how another person feels. And even if I'm dealing with somebody who is a Nazi, somebody who wants to exterminate other people because of their color or their creed, I want to understand from the inside what they feel, why they believe that way. Somebody who is a torturer at Guantanamo Bay, how did they come to that point? Because if I can understand that, I can maybe help to undo it. And if I can have empathy, if not sympathy, for the person, for the torturer. And I did actually know somebody who was a torturer in the British Army for more than a decade. And I didn't know he'd been a torturer until well into our relationship, when one day he started crying and talking about how he had, in the 1960s, tortured people in Borneo. And it was fascinating to go, this is my friend. This is a person I've known for probably about 7 years then. And he did these really dreadful things. How do I feel about him? And I just felt sorry for him because he was crying. And he was a hard man. He was a man who'd been convicted of assault along the way. He'd been a soldier. He'd killed people as a soldier. And he'd killed people. He said, they would have killed me. So that's that. Don't. But I damaged people physically for the sake of getting information out of them. And, he could never forgive himself for that. Seeing that there is, that people can change, that we know, for example, with psychopaths, that their condition tends to diminish somewhere in their late 40s, and they will become less nasty for the most part. How can we change that process in society? How can we bring people, as Tony Blair said, to be transparent and honest, do things he never managed? Recently he's in a scandal about having scammed the tax people. This has come out in the last week or so, that he managed to find a way of not having to pay £213,000 in duty on a house that he bought. it always bothers me. This guy is a socialist with millions of pounds. There's a bit of a confusion there for me. But how do we teach people that they're allowed to make their own minds up? That they
right. So hold that thought. Thank you for that. So how do we teach people? And it occurs to me, I was about to ask you, can you imagine in England a sort of part of the school system for, I'm going to make up an age, for 14-year-olds, a class that every school kid would take that teaches them about this power dynamic and gaslighting and manipulation. I know of no such class in England that 14-year-olds are required to take. Now, if there were, it's sort of teaching you to love yourself and protect yourself. And I did not grow up in England, so it's wrong for me to say this, but I will just surmise that in England, just like in the United States and elsewhere, instead of having a class in public school, in the just general school that kids would go to, we don't have a class like that. We have contracted that job, that class, to religion.
Yes. To some extent, we actually have.
That's like Sunday school. So it's like we have our societies in I'm just speaking about our Western quote unquote democracies here. We have offloaded that job of protecting our kids' psyches and their self-confidence and holding that password of self-confidence within themselves to our religions, whether that's our rabbi and the synagogues or the churches with the priests and the preachers and so on. In imams in Islam, the Islam religion, and the Buddhists would have their own leaders. I think that that's who we have contracted this job, the very, very important job for our kids to. And yet, I would ask if that's the smartest thing to do.
I would infer that it's not. And in fact, in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, our school systems no longer give that right to, it's no longer religious education where you'll find that. For some years now.
So we don't find it there.
No, there are classes now in all of our schools, and there have been for some time, which talk about how to act and behave and society. They talk about bullying, and they've replaced religious education. And
do they talk about gaslighting?
In some cases, because this class is not actually. And it's rather good, I think. It's not set within our national curriculum where you have to learn these extremely tedious things that will be of no use to you later in life. I'm sorry to say that individual teachers are allowed leeway in what they will teach, but there are modules on bullying, on pro-social behavior. These things have advanced. It's got better. But I wanted to say that I am actually very gradually working with a teacher who's an expert in this field. She, for nearly 20 years, has run a group called Wise Up. And every year during that time, she has had a day where I think it'd be senior high school in the US, but we call them sixth form, kids of 16, 17, 18. All of the kids in the school in that age group will go through a day where they talk about authoritarianism and cults and things. Also working, again, very gradually, far too gradually, with a head teacher who works in primary education, which I think is grammar school. It means something different here, but kids are sort of age 5 to 11, and looking at a program to teach about coercive control and how that works. So And I think there are such things underway independently in US schools. The work of Ken Robinson, his 2 books, The Elements and Creative Schooling, have been bestsellers. So I'm very heartened to find that there is a shift in education, which is saying, yes, we need to get children to think about these things and talk about these things. It's still near the beginning, but it is happening.
It's near the beginning. And what I would put forward to you is that you or I, or you and I, should come up with something, a play, a poem, a quick video that is no more than a minute, or something like that. And I'm sure there's things out there like it already, but that would be targeting 15-year-olds and just sort of pointing out that hello, everybody, the people who should be teaching you about gaslighting are gaslighting you.
And so are we.
and watch out, watch your back. Go read 1984. Go.
Well, Intelligent Disobedience by Ira Chaleff is an incredibly, or our books, read our books. Read Opening Our Minds, read Rama Trump, and make this the theme for conversation, for discussion.
Right. And maybe the way to do that, to make it a matter of discussion, is through humor. Do some kind of 2-minute or 5-minute Monty Python-esque sort of, where maybe we make a play where we're showing that it's the people in the cults who are teaching people why not to join cults. It reminds me of when Scientology, what did they do? They sued the Cult Awareness Network so many times that they bought it over. So when someone called the Cult Awareness Network to find out how they could help their kids, the person answering the phone was a Scientologist trying to, it's just, that's a form of gaslighting, I guess. It's just, it's ironic. It's kind of sick. And it's kind of symbolic of how the power structures, it's like, to me, it reminds me of how Christianity in large form, or in some form, seems to have forgotten what Christ was talking about. And I think they forgot about white supremacy in particular.
They forgot that a long time ago. If you go back to the Nicene Creed from 325 AD, and you look at the meeting that determined that creed, there was an awful lot of bullying. It's where Saint Athanasius comes forward as a great speaker. But Constantine the emperor basically said, this is what you're going to decide, this is what you're going to do. And Christianity was hijacked by the Roman Empire. And it already had all sorts of problems, even in the first century. When you look at the arguments of the so-called heresies, the Valentinian heresy particularly interests me. Man who came second in the vote for Pope at Rome and said, there's a secret teaching. And I've got that secret teaching and you haven't. It all gets very confusing. But
right. And it's not just that Christianity gets hijacked. I mean, the same happens with Buddhism and Judaism and Islam at times, in certain instances.
And great teachers emerge, great, people like Rumi, for example, or Hafez, who have a great deal of insight into the world. In Islam, you have a whole roster of these Sufi teachers who say wonderful things, but you also have some really rather nasty people who take power. And that dynamic works through Christianity. You have Meister Eckhart or Molinos. There are men of tremendous, and women, Julian of Norwich, people of tremendous wisdom and insight. I did want to say that in terms of how to teach this, the best people to teach this are people like Seth MacFarlane or Stone and Parker or Matt Groening. And they are already teaching it. That it often, I'm looking at, it's been a while, but I'm looking at The Simpsons and going, that's the voice of a Scientologist, Nancy Cartwright, actually teaching us something about how to behave in the world. My kids watch South Park, and now Rick and Morty, which is sort of, and you are actually being told all sorts of things about racism and the horrors of, Eric Theodore Cartman. It all turns. So to quote from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says, "Look under the stone and you will find me there." Everything that we're talking about is out there and is being talked about. It's a matter of focusing and understanding that, unfortunately, you can learn more about how to live from animated cartoons than you can from going to school. And that's something that teachers need to reflect on, that education should catch your imagination. It should set you on fire with the need for learning, rather than boring the hell out of you in an overly hot room with a bunch of kids who you can't stand. It should be a community thing, and there are so many educationalists. Matthew Lipman shines among them, Ken Robinson, who I've mentioned. This stuff is happening in our society. It's just spreading it further. And I talk with many people who are really disillusioned, and I'm not. I seek to be a realist, not an optimist. But I do believe that, this may be the awning of the cage of aquariums. This may be a time when we can catch hold, and unfortunately not original to me, that we can catch hold and make some really serious progress in the way that humanity behaves towards humanity, by exposing authoritarianism as a very sad way of being. Reading about all of these neo-Nazis, people like George Lincoln Rockwell or William Pierce, Oswald Mosley, they lived awfully sad lives. Ron Hubbard, the gurus, Sun Myung Min, Rajneesh, Rajneesh's drug addiction is just, 2 hours of nitrous oxide and 50 milligrams of Valium a day. That's 10 of the big pills of Valium. They're awfully miserable people. To make a better world, we shouldn't be following Ayn Rand or, these despicable people. You have an appointment to go to. I have an appointment to go to. And all of the children at home watching have appointments to go to, I'm sure. So is there anything you'd like to say to sum up or to spur further debate?
Yes, just in closing, I'm so sorry to have stomped on your foot.
Yeah, well, the truth is, Mark, you didn't.
Oh, right. What is the truth, John?
I was gaslit that way. I was led to believe, for example, I'd recruited this chap into Scientology, and I really believed it. And then he took me to court and sued me. And it was just weird. For 2 years, we'd not met and we'd not telephoned. So we'd only communicated by letter. Being a little retentive, I had carbon copies of all of my letters. So because of the court case, I had to read all the letters, and I realized I had come to believe that I had re-recruited him in Scientology, and I hadn't. There was nothing there. So gaslighting is a very interesting process in terms of how people can persuade us that our perception of reality is wrong. And so yes, grab hold of your own view of the world, trust yourself, and develop that.
Amen.
And respect yourself, as the Staple Singers said.
Well said.
What a tremendous pleasure it is talking with you, Mark. As
always, John.
Great. So I have been John Atack, and I probably will be John Atack for a bit longer. And as L. Ron Hubbard once said, thank you for listening.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.